The new rules dictate that buyers must have a written agreement with a realtor prior to seeing a home. To hear our thoughts and more, stay tuned to this episode of The Den. The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Den. And we had a case that came out, the Sitzer-Burnett case, and NAR had a settlement and some rules have changed. And specifically, if you're a buyer, there's a new landscape that you have to play with. But before we get to that, let me introduce my friends, my partners, my co-hosts, the fellow members of the Lyons Group. To my left, Paul, hand me the Rockberry, Aspen, the Ninja Groen, and the boss, Shannon Martin Martinez. My name is Ben Wingin at Lyons, and I'm the host of The Den, top brokers taking on tough questions. And today we're going to be talking about the buyer-broker group. Oh, stop, Paul. Oh, my gosh. Every once in a while, I get off the rails.
Sorry.
You got to reel me back.
Got really high there. The Merv Griffin Show.
The Merv Griffin Show. I love it. So today it's all about buyer-broker agreement. So the landscape for real estate has indeed changed. As I alluded to just a minute ago, the Sitzer-Burnett case is a case that came out of Missouri. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's something that is just, it's a new pivot in the industry. And it gives a few more options to buyers, especially, and to sellers to some degree. So we're going to talk about that. And as a buyer, if you're going to purchase a property, what do you need to understand about how the new way of doing business is going to parlay? So we have these neat little forms here now that I uncovered it. It's like the reveal. Oh, oh my gosh.
That was weak.
I know, it was so weak.
But we've already had that form.
Yes, we've had this form, but this I just am showing our audience. So like this is the new buyer-broker agreement in New Mexico. Now, Colorado has a different type of agreement, but they're all basically in the same vein in the sense that you have to establish something in writing with a buyer before showing a property. So let's talk a little bit about that process and how it may change the industry. Let's just talk about consumers right now or potential clients. What are they going to have to? I mean, there's going to be a learning curve. Aspen, why don't you kick us off on some thoughts on what that learning curve may be, and then we can go from there.
I actually think it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we kind of touched base on our last episode where we're go, 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 go. And I think it might be nice to slow down the process a little bit, because I think especially in these last few years when interest rates were so low, everyone felt like they were missing out on a good deal. Everyone wanted to, get a jump on it. And now was the time, and which was really great for some people, but really hard for certain buyers as well. So I think that if you have to sign something beforehand and you also you have expectations set up at front. This is what I will give to you. This is what you have to give to me. We're both working towards a common goal of home buying, whether that's or business buying or whatever you're getting. But I don't think it's a bad thing to slow down the process a little bit and also negotiate a fee up front. I think that a lot of buyers were not understanding how their broker was paid. And you did hear people say, oh, well, I work for free. You don't pay me, which is not true in the slightest. We get paid, and we get paid at the end. And typically, who's the one actually paying for that? The buyer. So yeah. They have the loan, they have the money, whatever it is. So I do think it's going to slow down the process and set expectations at the beginning and really just hone in on a common goal and not just being a pop-up realtor or feeling like you're going to miss a deal and have to jump on something before you've really thought through it and made a good decision for you.
Yeah. I mean, you keyed in on a couple things. Right. I'm really thankful this is happening right now with 6.5%-ish interest rates where the market's just not flurried and there's a crazy amount of demand. Could you imagine if we were still in 3 and 4% interest rates and the market was just crazy, trying to bring clients up to speed? Like, look, I can't show you I know you want to see this thing just hit the market. I know you want to see it today. I cannot show you this property until we have a signed agreement stipulating what I'm going to get paid and what you're responsible for and how this all works. So now is actually a really good time to bring this up to speed. But the second part of what you keyed in on is this is your biggest asset that you'll likely own in your lifetime. Why wouldn't you want to take some time and really sit down and understand the process and sit down with a competent professional and understand there's an engagement? I mean, I would not want to do something like a major surgery or, be involved in a major litigation or something like that without sitting down with a professional and going, I need to understand the landscape before we start taking steps. Paul, you want to add to that a little bit?
Well, I think to go back to the intent of this whole thing is to separate, historically sellers have paid both the seller's broker and the buyer's broker. I think the intent here is to separate those and allow that the buyers can negotiate with their brokers on how they get paid. Sellers can do the same. We are no longer sharing compensation between brokers. It's now being paid either directly from the seller or from the buyer. So I think, and then we're hearing all the time that the Department of Justice wants it to be more the person receiving the services pays the person providing the services. So I think, this really benefits both parties. The process is kind of difficult for the rest of us, but I think once we get a good handle on it, we can get it to the customers and have them understand it. And I think the learning curve is going to be a little bit longer on this one.
Yeah. There's a little more learning. And so Shannon, talk to us about just the process. If you're a buyer, like what's the new process and what should you be prepared for?
Well, I think buyers have always had, why are you
That's the question.
Yeah.
Actually, before
we
that,
don't
she
even
said,
know.
don't ask me.
Yeah, don't ask me.
And you went to her.
I think the important thing to take away is before this, buyers had expectation that if you see a sign in a yard and you're interested in any information, that you just call the number and somebody will come open the door and you can have that discussion and look through it and find out some information and decide if maybe even the home buying process is right for you or not. That's going to be very different for a buyer now. A buyer has to know that they are committed. They have to be ready to buy a home. They have to have probably consulted with a broker and have some expectations in mind of what they're going to get and what they're going to do before they walk in that house. So I think that's going to be the biggest shift for buyers now, is not being able to just, pop up every, couple of months and I'm going to look at a little here and there. And then one day it's going to, come to fruition and we're going to buy a house. Because, traditionally most people are looky-loos. That's what they do. They look for a long time and they pop in and out and they call in a place once in a while or whatever. And then they start getting more serious and then they start getting, real committal. You're not going to be able to see anything until you're committal.
Yeah. I mean,
that's going to be the difference now.
Yeah, that's really a great way to explain that. And so I'm just going to jump into our agreement here. One of our agreements, we have a couple, kind of a short form, and this is the long version of this. But if a buyer calls and says, "Hey, I want to see a property," then we're going to say, "Let's come in and sit down and have a consult." Right? We're going to create more of a boutique, specialized experience for you as a buyer. But there are certain obligations that you have as a buyer, and there are certain obligations that I have as a broker. And so I'm going to just kind of read these just so our audience is clear on some of the general things that we're discussing. There are broker obligations. Become familiar with buyer's property requirements, right? I need to understand what you're wanting to buy. Assist the buyer to locate financing. We need to help you through the pre-qualification process. Assist buyer to locate suitable properties, of course. Assist buyer in negotiating acquisition terms. You're going to help them, give them thoughts on how to approach a purchase. Assist buyer to prepare offers. Of course, you're going to prepare the offer as a realtor for your client. Assist the buyer in monitoring pre-closing and closing procedures. Those are the duties that we owe our clients in this particular agreement. Now, the buyer has agreements duties, I should say, that they owe us. They're going to work exclusively with us to negotiate or purchase. They're going to provide accurate, up-to-date, complete information about the buyer's property requirements, financial qualifications, and relevant personal situation. If you get divorced, we just had an episode. If you get divorced through this process, you're obligated to let us know if your financial picture changes, if you got laid off, if something happens that you cannot purchase a home, you need to be upfront and honest about that. You need to refer to broker all inquiries from any source, including but not limited to other brokers and sellers. In other words, you're working with us exclusively. So if someone says, hey, I've got a home coming up that I want to sell and kind of meets your criteria, as a buyer, you got to go, okay, I'm working with my broker. I need to get it with my broker. Okay. And then you need to direct any questions to the broker, which is pretty critical because you can't go, it's trying to keep you from going out and talking to a bunch of different brokers when you have a broker. You've agreed to work with this broker and act in good faith with the broker in all negotiations for any property. So there are obligations, and these are pretty serious. on both ends. So the big question is, how comfortable are you sitting down and signing an agreement like this? I may not know you. I may not necessarily know if I want to work with you. You may not know me or necessarily know if you want to work with me. How are we going to navigate that? Aspen, why don't you take that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot different than you going on Zillow or Realtor and saying, schedule a tour, because now people are going to want to sit down with you beforehand. I think instead of, just going on and trying to have someone call you and establish a relationship that way, I think you need to shop around, do a few consults, spend a day, set up some appointments, not with a ton of people, but maybe you go with the top 3 that seems like they're going to fit with what you're looking for and make a decision that way. I think that's also respectful to everybody's time and intention. We're interviewing for the job essentially, and then you can decide who is the best fit for you and what you want and how your personalities mesh. This is a long and intensive and emotional process for a lot of people. So it makes sense to slow it down, decide who you want to work with, and then move forward instead of finding a house and then trying to find a realtor, which I think is a lot of how it's been done. You just click. You've been looking on Zillow for months, and then you decide you want to go see a house and you're ready, but you're just having someone call you. And I don't think that's really the way that I would like to go about it if I was a new buyer.
Yeah, and we've had situations like that. It's kind of the cart before the horse. We've done it for decades and decades, the cart before the horse. And I've had situations where people have called me and said, I saw this house, I went in there and I'm working with this realtor and I don't feel comfortable. And I said, well, you're working with them now, and I'm not going to get in between that because, you made that decision to do that. I think it's going to eliminate some of those because they were so excited to see that property and that they weren't thinking about who they were working with and they just went out and made the offer and then they're in it. And then they're like, oh, I don't know, like my partner here who's supposed to be helping me may not be helping me because this is a major decision to buy a property and it is a big asset. So what other things should buyers be thinking about? I like the idea of just, maybe doing some research beforehand, contacting a few realtors and saying, hey, I just want to sit down and talk about your services. Can different realtors bring different advantages to the market? Shannon, why don't you take that one?
Absolutely. And I think, that goes back to Aspen's point where, do you really want to be committed to just the person that answered the Zillow call for you? We answer those calls and we try to earn someone's business. And I'm sure other brokers are too. So that's not an insult to them. But as a consumer, if you were looking for, say an orthodontist to put, some braces on your kid's teeth, do you just put it out there on a website and the first person that calls you is your guy? You don't check pricing. You don't check, successfulness reviews. We don't do that. We ask around. We ask other friends, who do you use for an accountant? Who did your knee surgery?
Yeah.
We do those things first. So it makes sense to do that as you would choose a broker because all of them are different. You have brokers that have, maybe there's some brokers that have been in here for 30 or 40 years, but they're still not as knowledgeable as good as the one that's been in 3 or 4 years. But you wouldn't know that unless you looked, or vice versa. Some brokers just have different expectations than you, and that just might not be a good fit. I agree. I think it's important for people these days to slow down, shop for your broker, find a partner. You're going to sign an agreement with them. You don't want to sign an agreement with just the first person that answered the phone, and get into a relationship with them. Build that relationship, and you are partners for that transaction.
Yeah, great point. So I want to pivot a little bit to compensation. So there's a lot of questions around compensation. And so I just want to throw out an example, and Paul, you can take this one. If you had, let's just say in this agreement that we have, okay, we have to stipulate what our compensation is as brokers, right? And who's responsible for paying that compensation? And that is you as the buyer. So let's say I put $1,000 down for my compensation. I'm just using a round number here. Obviously, that's negotiable between buyer and broker. But if I put $1,000 down as my compensation, and we go find a property that you love, hey, that's my property. And the seller the seller is saying, I am not offering out any cooperating commission. Then you as the buyer are responsible for paying that. Now, there can be, maybe they're offering out a little bit less than what I'm asking or whatever else. So Paul, speak to that a little bit about how the compensation and the cooperation between the seller and the buyer may look moving forward, if there is any cooperation in that regard.
Okay, there's two different tracks now in how this works. So if we're talking about buyers, we've got to talk about sellers, because there could be an opportunity for sellers to pay some of this commission or compensation. We can't say commission anymore, by the way. So compensation for the listing broker, that's negotiated between listing broker and the seller. Now, the seller has the opportunity to hand out or to offer to the listing broker to work with an unrepresented buyer. They get to negotiate that rate too. They also get to negotiate a rate for a buyer's broker if another broker brings a buyer. So that is all put out in the listing agreement. Now, at the same time, buyers are out there finding their realtors, going through the process we just discussed, and they get to negotiate the compensation they're going to pay their broker. Now, at that point, they don't have a seller going to pay that compensation. So at that point they're on the hook for whatever they agreed to pay.
So as a buyer, for our clients to understand, it's fair to assume if you sign an agreement with a broker that says $1,000, you're responsible for that.
Yep.
Now, you're hoping that the property you're going to buy is that seller is maybe offering out some of that.
Yeah.
But don't assume that.
So the important thing too is once you get into that agreement with your broker, you've got to let everybody know that. You got to let the lender know. It's got to be in your pre-qual. The process now is once you go and start looking at homes, the brokers have to make a phone call out to the sellers or to the listing agent and say, are the sellers offering up compensation? If they are, then you have to figure out if it covers what you are paying your broker. If it doesn't, you may be covering a portion of it and the seller's covering the other portion. But the changes now are we can negotiate all of those things up front. And buyers are now able to request compensation in the offers.
In the purchase agreement.
Which
loops the brokers in, and I have a little bit of heartburn with that.
But then it gets taken off and put on another form. So.
Sure. Yeah. And so that makes sense. So I'm going to go back to the original part of what you were saying. Thank you for clearly explaining that. It's clear as mud.
Hopefully that was
clear as mud. So you were saying the seller can actually negotiate a commission, is going to negotiate a commission with their realtor. And then if that realtor gets a sign call or someone comes in that wants to see and buy that property, in other words, they're working with both seller and buyer, there may be a different commission or compensation structure. And then if it's just you and your seller as a broker and seller, but you have another broker and buyer in play, that may look totally different. So Aspen, you want to expand upon that a little bit, or some thoughts or maybe some rubs that may happen there? Or
I think the biggest rub is going to be if the seller doesn't get the price that they want, the first thing that's going to go is the commission to the buyer's broker. That's what I think is going to happen, compensation to the buyer's broker.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one to transition to that, right? Yeah.
But I think that's going to be the biggest rub. So I think it's really, like Paul said, you need to have it done up front, negotiate beforehand. It's on the pre-approval, because there's things that we can do. You can raise the price and then use a seller concession to cover some of that. Even with VA loans now, you can do that. So that's, a positive thing. But I think kind of making us a party to the contract, a little bit more like commercial deals, because it's almost exactly the same process now as a commercial deal would be, where you negotiate beforehand and then it's actually on the contract what your compensation is going to be. So I think it's going to be hard to delineate between, the lines of who's paying for what and at what point does this start getting cut. So I think that's going to be the biggest rub is.
So you think the compensation component may be treated like, almost like, for lack of a better analogy, like a floor allowance, right? So I'm offering out the $5,000 flooring allowance, but that's at this price. Mm-hmm. If you come in and offer below that, that flooring allowance goes away. So that may be that's what you're saying as far as an offer of compensation to the other side.
I think we're going to see that a lot, which I don't think is necessarily too bad of a thing too, because I think it might slow down the house climbing prices. I mean, we know people can hardly afford a first-time home anymore. So I think it might slow down the house prices going up a little bit, but there are options. And I think that's where it's really going to come into play. It's not rolling into the loan, it's a seller concession, but essentially you're not going to necessarily have to have the cash for that. But I do think you probably should, because you don't know what the seller is going to do.
So that brings me to the next point, which would be, and Shannon, maybe you can take this one. How now sellers may be going, yay, I don't have to offer out compensation to another realtor. And that's just so our sellers know, that's always been kind of the situation. It's always been negotiable. But does that behoove a seller to do? Because if you do not offer out compensation to another realtor, are there some drawbacks to that?
So I think that's an important thing to note is, and so just to back up a little bit, I don't want buyers to be fearful and feel like if I go buy a house, I have to add this in. Mm-hmm. If you find a house, if I introduce you to a house that the seller is not paying a compensation on, you don't have to buy it. Mm-hmm. You're not obligated to pay me. We are not obligated to buy that house. So I don't want you to feel like I have to pay that. If we make a run at a house and they say no, and you don't make the numbers work, we can simply walk away. So you're not obligated to do that. Mm-hmm. I think that's the important part that you're making here, though. From a seller's point, the buyer doesn't have to buy your house. And if the buyer doesn't have that money, traditionally sellers have been used to paying a certain fee for both brokers. I think most sellers will still see the advantage of that. They don't want to limit the buyers that are coming to their house. Most sellers don't want to. And most sellers want to continue that.
It does say in our buyer broker agreement that we will do everything we can to get the compensation from the seller side.
Yes.
Great point.
Yes, exactly. So if I write an offer for Aspen, she's just a home buyer, and we make a run at it and we try to negotiate, and that seller just says, no, absolutely not. I want full price. There's no more room to mark this up. The buyer has no more room to go up anymore, and this just isn't going to work. We may just walk away and try a run at a different house. It's no different than not being able to come to terms on any other agreement. So that's one thing to remember as a buyer. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to pay it. You can choose not to buy houses that don't offer it. But the second thing is as a seller, you have to think about that. How much do you want to limit access to your house? You're not obligated to pay it. But we have seen so far the homes that don't have the compensation offer in there, fewer showings. Because buyers are not prepared to do that at this point.
Yeah.
They're just not prepared to do that.
And a buyer may just say, look,
don't show me any houses.
Do not show me any homes that do not offer to cover your fee.
Mm-hmm. You can do that.
And that's okay. That's part of it. Where a seller may realize, I want the full pool of buyers. I don't want to eliminate. And it's okay if they eliminate. I mean, that's a seller's discretion. They may say, I want a specific buyer that's healthy enough to buy, financially healthy enough to pay for their own realtor. I'm only offering X amount of compensation, and that's it. And that's okay.
This is my biggest rub with it, though. This is my biggest issue with it. And I think I've been pretty vocal about first-time home buyers. They just cannot afford houses now with the rates now. They really got kind of bought out in the last few years. And this is not necessarily going to affect my clients. I work mainly with investment and commercial clients, not a lot of first-time home buyers. My clients are going to be completely fine. It's the first-time home buyers that are, it's already hard enough to save up even 3 to 5% plus another, 3% for closing costs, your down payment, your closing costs. And now they're going to have to potentially save another
couple
XYZ.
$1,000 to that too.
It just keeps pushing out further and further and further, and house prices just keep going up and up and up. I think this is going to be hard for first-time home buyers. And I've said that from the beginning. This is not making it very fair for the first-time home buyer. That's my biggest problem.
And you would think with all the regulation we have on us, all the regulation is made to make for fairness. It always comes down to fairness. So all the regulation that we deal with is for fairness. This, in my opinion, I'm with you, is not fair. It is taking those first-time home buyers. It is taking those people with lower incomes, just the average family with one income, maybe a family of 4. And, they can pay maybe just the payment, but they don't have that upfront investment to come in with $25,000. Most people don't.
I think this is the unintended consequence of that lawsuit, because it was the sellers who brought the suit because they thought it was unfair paying the broker to negotiate against them using their equity. So this wasn't even a buyer's thing, but the buyers are the ones harmed.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and partially there was some buyer component in there where the buyers said, look, the price is kind of rolling in what your compensation is. So ultimately I may be paying that. Right. So I want to negotiate that. So there is a little bit of that, but you're absolutely right in the sense that, your point there. So we could literally talk about, go ahead, Paul.
Well, there are two things that we've got to do too. That with this buyer broker agreement, we're not allowed to show a home. So what we've done in our showing service is that's coming out later this month, right? In middle of August, whenever this comes out. That's on you, Ben.
Yeah. Don't hold your breath. It'll be purple.
Whenever this comes out, you have to have this before you can schedule the showing. So this is going to be, everybody needs to be doing this. So if you have a realtor that's going to try to show it without, they're not going to be able to.
Yeah. And there's some hefty fines.
Yeah. Big fines.
So there's some big fines.
For the realtor and the brokerage, pretty much across the nation.
Yeah. Well, and then compensation is no longer allowed on the MLS.
Yeah.
So that's also going to slow this process down quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of facets to this. And so we wanted to come out with an episode just so we could talk through, give you kind of a simple breakdown of how this is going to parlay. We'll probably do a follow-up episode as things begin to unfold and some of the things that we're seeing that we may not have anticipated and things that we think are rubs aren't rubs. So we'll definitely do a follow-up episode to this. But let's jump into the speed round. And Shannon, I'm going to start with you. Is the buyer-broker agreement a good thing and why?
I don't know.
I know.
No, you know what? I think it can be a good thing. I think what I want the public to know is that this is at this point making us as uncomfortable as it is the buyer. So when a buyer has to show up at a first time showing and sign a commitment to you, we're just as uncomfortable. We want to earn your business. We don't want to be doing that. We would prefer to build a relationship with you. So, obviously we're going to find the best ways forward that we can. Most brokers are going to be good and they are going to do the best that they can to build a good relationship and do a good job for you and earn your business. So, I think over time it will become more normal. I think over time it will become a good thing. I think for right now, it's probably really overwhelming for buyers. It's probably really frightening for buyers. And they probably feel that we're a little bit predatory. And I really want the public to know that's not our intent. Our hands are tied. This is not coming from us. And we're just doing the best we can in a difficult situation.
Great point, Shannon. Aspen?
I think the buyer broker agreement is a good thing. The whole process, I'm kind of with Shannon. I don't agree with everything that's happening, but as far as the buyer broker agreement, I think it's a good thing. Also, I really value people's time, and it's really frustrating for me. We all had this happen, I'm sure, where you go show someone 10, 15 houses, you're with them for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they do a sign call and then they sign with somebody else because they were just so excited about the house. So I really value time. We all take time away from what's important to us. Ultimately, this is a job. So I think in that regard, I'm excited about the buyer-broker agreement. And I think the buyer-broker agreement is a good thing.
I agree.
Excellent. Paul?
I think disclosure and understanding the process is always a good thing. So for the customers, I think this is really good. This is going to take us some getting used to. But I think the customers knowing upfront how this works and having a say in it can't be a bad thing.
True.
Just a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
For us.
Yeah.
Especially not an awesome time to be in leadership.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You guys are dealing with all the changes right now, and that is difficult. But I want to round us up with, I think overall this is going to be a very good thing, and I appreciate what you said, Aspen, in the sense that, we're very loyal here. We work hard for our customers. We do what we can to set our clients up for success, and it is hard when you work on something for 6 months. Could you imagine going to your job for 6 months and they say, even if you do a really great job, you may not get paid at the end of that? I mean, that's what the reality as realtors we face every single day. And so the fact that we now have a written agreement with a client that allows us to be very transparent about what we're going to make through the transaction is a wonderful thing. And it is a little bit convoluted, and we do have some things we have to work through, and thankful for you two at the steward as being stewards of the association right now, because it is a difficult time, and we have to work together as realtors to pivot here. And that brings me to Shannon's point, which is as a broker, we want to express to you that this isn't easy for us. It's not an easy thing to sit down and say, you really don't know me, but we're going to sign an agreement, right? So we're going to have to navigate these waters as well. And it's not that we are trying to be predatory with our tactics or anything like that. It's just the nature of the landscape has changed in real estate. And we really need to have a clear understanding of how we work together in an engagement contract on one of your biggest assets you'll ever purchase. And that's okay. I like that. And I like the fact that everyone's having to do it all at once. So there'll be one big learning curve. It's not scattered. So those are my final thoughts. Thank you for a great discussion today. I mean, again, I think we should have a follow-up episode on this as this plays out. Thank you for watching today's episode. If you like our content, go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. We're always posting content there. Of course, go to our Facebook page, like and subscribe there. Great content coming out. And sign up for our newsletter. That is a weekly pulse of great information coming your way. And we love to sit down with our clients and set you up for success. So go to sjcbroker.com and schedule a private consultation with any one of us here at the Lyons Group. We'd love to sit down with you and talk about the competitive advantages that we have to offer. So thank you for listening to this episode of The Den. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in The Den.